July 23rd, 2000. This was peak WWF momentum. The company was dominating pop culture, ratings were enormous, arenas were sold out everywhere, and the roster depth was arguably unmatched. At this point, The Rock had become the company's biggest babyface and a mainstream superstar. Triple H was fully established as the top heel under the McMahon-Helmsley regime, and newer names like Kurt Angle, Chris Jericho, and Chris Benoit were beginning to change the in-ring style of the company. Fully Loaded 2000 perfectly represents the Attitude Era balance. Chaotic storytelling, backstage drama, gimmick matches, incredible crowd reactions, and an undercard stacked with talent. Welcome everybody to Legends and Champions, where today we're going to be breaking down one of WWF's strongest overall pay-per-views of the year 2000. This show is indeed fully loaded. I'm Stefan Bennett, alongside Mike Maguire himself. Welcome, Mike.
Thank you, sir.
It's great to have you back. We hope you all enjoyed our SummerSlam 97 coverage that we brought to you just last week. Now, off the bat, this is actually one of my favourite WWF pay-per-views of all time, and it's interesting because it's not one of the big four. This kind of had a little bit of everything in this one. This was at a peak where the World Wrestling Federation was really starting to dominate the Monday Night Wars. Do you feel that with the rise of SmackDown being the second major show, this is where the beginning of the end really started for WCW?
I'd have to double check the dates here, but I think we were already kind of in that realm. Seeing a guy like Chris Benoit back in a world title picture after literally walking away from the world championship in WCW, that was a statement. That was definitely getting past all the hoopla of having these guys come in, but having him be the guy. And I think it's important that we preface this. We are going to be talking about Chris Benoit, but in no way are we glorifying everything else, obviously, that everybody knows about. So we don't need to go any further than that. But I just feel it's important because there's people, especially listening, that might have connections or maybe even objections to it, but just to let you know that that's the context of how we're going to be talking about him is in this show. But Stefan, I was interested as to why you chose this show, and so let me turn this back to you. Why was this your favorite show overall?
Of the year 2000, I mean, it wasn't my favourite show, but this is one of my favourite shows of all time, because for me it was a show that kind of came out of nothing. I mean, it was bridging these storylines. It was billed as a triple main event, and it's one of those shows which you think, a bit like Backlash, you look at, you go, okay, some stuff's going to go down here. We're just riding it out post-WrestleMania, heading probably towards SummerSlam. But for me, when I watched this, I was literally taken aback by how good this show really was. Sure, there's a couple of matches on there which you just sort of look at and go, oh, okay, you know, that's a typical WWF, WWE pay-per-view. There's a couple of what some people would say filler matches. They were filler matches, but not quite, because the titles were all on the line. Apart from the Women's Championship, they were all on the line at this event. And there was everything from the backstage segments, which I thought were some of the most entertaining in one show, to the quality of the matches. They were aggressive. And for me, it just really... It was a true showcase of what the World Wrestling Federation was like at the time. It showcased everything. And it was a solid show during the absence of Stone Cold Steve Austin as well. So for me, this one just... It's one that kind of just shouts out, hey, look at me. I know you didn't expect this. But for me, this is up there.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that, because on the original artwork for Fully Loaded, it was just a solo shot of Steve Austin. But then when the show actually happened and was released later on, it was three totally different faces on it. So interesting note with the Austin thing for sure. And I'm anxious to see where we go with this one, because like you said, there were some interesting matches. So I'll let you take it away.
The storytelling in this is outstanding. We know the partnership between JR, Jim Ross, and Jerry the King Lawler. They're up there along with Heenan and Monsoon, and their storytelling, especially during this period in the World Wrestling Federation, just really was the perfect marriage between what you're watching and what you're hearing. The narration almost of this art form was, for me, just at its peak. It was stellar. It didn't get better than it did during that time. We opened up with a 6-person tag match. It was Matt and Jeff Hardy and Lita against TNA, Test Albert and Trish Stratus. Now, this was actually a really good match off the bat, because no disrespect to Test Albert, Matt and Jeff Hardy, But the increasing popularity of Trish Stratus and Lita at that time was huge, because these were the first two female superstars that started to catapult in popularity from what we had seen previous. You know, we'd seen the likes of Ivory and Jacqueline and to name a few, Sable. I mean, Sable was peak, but there were questions over her ring ability. But it was the investment that fans... They just won the fans over. We saw how the crowd were more into it when the two of them were in the ring in this match. To be fair, they tore it up. You know, I know Trish was still learning. Lita had some background, obviously, from her earlier years. And again, not taking anything away from the guys in this match. But do you think this was maybe Vince's way of saying, right, we want this to be more of a showcase of these two? Well,
I mean, this was literally... the design of the tag team, I feel, you know, with the trios, obviously, of Team Extreme and Tess and Albert here. And if I go back to Trish's history here, I do believe this was maybe her third match, maybe fourth. I don't know, but it was early in her career. Definitely one of her first pay-per-view matches. She had been a part of some stuff on SmackDown and Sunday Night Heat before, but as far as actual pay-per-view, this was her first in-ring action on pay-per-view. So definitely a I don't want to say smoke and mirrors sort of approach to it, but it was definitely sort of a case of let's showcase them differently here. And they actually got a chance to work, which was nice to see, even though it was still surrounded with what was popular for the time, so to speak.
I agree. I think it helped with Matt and Jeff, as well as Lita, the look they had, that grungy, edgy look about them, which was obviously really popular with a lot of the younger fans at the time. We see that Lita won the match with a beautiful, perfectly placed moonsault onto Trish, to which would end up becoming the theme for the rest of the evening between these two, which would be Trish would be whipping Lita with a belt. But it's amazing when you go back to these earlier days of Trish and Lita, of them having one of the most notable female rivalries in the company, to looking at the friendship that they formed over the years off screen, the work they've done together. It's wonderful that when you think of Trish, you think of Lita. When you think of Lita, you think of Trish. These two really were trailblazers, weren't they?
Oh, absolutely. In every way. And they, I feel, were kind of the transition, shall we say, like the Sonny Sable era into marketable people that could also deliver as far as work went. And yeah, like I said, this was Trish's like fourth actual match on TV, and to see where they would go from being the quote unquote, and I hate this term, but the eye candy on the show, to actually bringing in physicality. And we would see that later on in the show as well. This was a chance for them to show they could do more than just stand still, be pretty, so to speak.
Yeah, because there's definitely a mismatch as far as the guys go. I mean, you've got Test and Albert, these two huge, giant powerhouses, and then you've got Matt and Jeff that are the high flyers. And do you think, because apart from really the Rockers, there aren't really many tag teams that at that time had passed through the ranks in WWF that were quite like the Hardys. Do you think they kind of changed the dynamics of the tag team division when they came in?
Well, I certainly hope you're not speaking ill of Techno Team 2000. But
I'll let you have that one, considering the Fabulous Rougeau brothers are one of my top all-time tag teams ever.
You know what?
I love those guys.
Everybody tries. Anyway, as far as having that kind of middleweight, I don't want to say cruiserweight because they weren't, but having that middleweight, high-flying tag team, I think there is a good progression between the Rockers to the Hardys as far as generational. And that's weird to say because even in 2026, when we're producing the show, the Hardys are still wrestling. But nevertheless, yeah, I think you have an interesting point there. And I'm trying to think of other tag teams, especially in WWF or WWE at the time. And correct me if I'm wrong, guys and girls, in the comments, but I'm hard-pressed to come up with another that would be as comparable.
Yeah, I can't. No one's really coming to mind. Not I can think of either. So that was off the bat a fantastic opener, one that left me kind of thinking, "Oh, please, sir, I'd like some more." Then we moved into probably the most filler of filler matches on the card: Taz versus Al Snow. So it was a very short match, quite physical. We'll get the result. Obviously, Taz wins with the Taz mission. Now, Taz, obviously, only months prior, had debuted at the Royal Rumble. Obviously, there was this incredible buzz about Taz, you know, from those who knew him from ECW, knew what he was all about. Beating Kurt Angle, allegedly, so Kurt would say, with the Taz mission at the Royal Rumble, ending his winning streak. What do you think went wrong with Taz? Because after this, there wasn't really much that really went on with Taz in terms of in-ring after this. I mean, there was the bit with the invasion the following year, and which he got kicked out of the alliance, and then he just went on to commentary.
Taz also had literally come off an injury before coming into this match, so that was part of it, whether it was storyline enhanced or not. And then, of course, he would go on to have more injuries as things went on. So I think it was maybe just a case of timing for Taz more than anything else. And I mean, I've always got a soft spot in my heart for Taz. Some people love him, some people don't. And I always found Taz to be underrated for his WWE run, even though it was so short. And unfortunately, it didn't have a ton of great moments as far as really standing out beyond the ECW stuff, you know. And I go back to even the stuff before Taz was officially part of WWE, going back to the Lawler stuff, you know, back in the late 90s. And I think by the time Taz got to WWE, he had, you know, enough injuries build up. He was already doing some part-time commentary here and there to begin with. Some of his stuff that he was doing, was it on Heat or where did they do it? But it was Cooking with Taz.
Oh.
I don't know if you ever...
Yeah, Cooking with Taz. God, do you know what? If you hadn't have referenced that, it wouldn't have come to mind.
I freaking loved Cooking with Taz. It was some of the funniest, stupidest stuff. You could see exactly where the bit was going, but it was so well done. And I thought that for him, that actually brought out a different personality. And I thought it was really great. So I don't know. I feel that Taz, they had a couple start and stops with him, but I think the injuries got in the way. And I think his shift to commentary was the best move for him. Now, Dan Lavransky, who, of course, regulars on our shows from time to time, he can't stand Taz on commentary. I always rib him about it because I think Taz is usually pretty good. But I was also a big fan of the Taz show, his radio show. So there's, I don't know, like I said, soft spot for Taz. I don't know if they missed the boat so much as just timing didn't work out overall.
Yeah, I remember later in the year when he had that brief rivalry with JR and Jerry the King. That, to me, I actually loved that dynamic. When you see Taz walking around pretending he's blind because he's blinded JR with having glass in his eye and all that. That was some great work. One thing I noticed, though, with Taz, which is still, I think, relevant even now, all these years, well, 26 years later, which is incredible to think that
we're old.
20. Yeah, we're old. We're so old. One day we'll have to learn to deal with that. We still have talent that struggle after having these huge, significant debuts. Why do you think that happens so often? Do you think it's just WWE get carried away with marketing somebody and going, yes, like we'll put that, and then they actually then go, actually, second thought, we don't actually know what we're going to do with you?
Part of it could be rushing people. Another part of it could just be pressure makes diamonds. You can show up and get better as time goes by. I mean, we could say that about ourselves, Stefan. You know, I mean, I'm not the same guy doing radio that I was 20 years ago. You know, when I first came in, I wrote down every single word I ever had to say on a show. I spent 8 hours writing out a 6-hour show on a music station, which meant I was literally talking for about 3 minutes an hour, you know? So it's pretty crazy how sometimes we can put the pressure on ourselves, but when something grooves and it really takes off, then it's easily forgotten how rough things were in the beginning or how start and stop things were for some people. Now, there are cases, too, where they've put people on and they've immediately taken them off, too, because things weren't working for whatever reason. And I think that as fans, all we can do is speculate half the time because we don't know what the decision process actually is.
Absolutely. Our third match, European Championship on the line, Eddie Guerrero defending against former Radicals brethren Perry Saturn. Now, this was actually one of the strongest matches in terms of in-ring wrestling on the night. No surprises there, two stellar workers. Now, Eddie Guerrero's charisma was impossible to ignore because obviously you see Saturn, that brings that intensity, the physicality to the match. He has Terry Runnels in his corner. We've got this dynamic, this ever-growing popularity between Eddie Guerrero and China. Now, Terry interferes with kicking Eddie with a low blow outside the ring. Saturn, and this is one of the takeaways I have from this match, is the way Saturn wins that match is this elbow drop from the top, and it lands right on Eddie's kidney area, and that's how he wins the match and wins the title. That WCW style, did you notice that difference in work ethic and the style?
To a degree, sure. I mean, these are also both smaller, tighter, intenser guys to begin with. Like they were a different breed altogether. This is in WWF where you go to the top of the card and it's all, for the most part, bigger, beefier guys, or a guy like Chris Jericho, who was once that WCW style, but had learned to adapt to the WWE style and worked bigger than he was. So if we're going to get all nerdy wrestling term on this, then
please do.
Yeah, well, I just I always feel weird doing this because I don't like criticizing quote work so much as some people do, because, and it's not saying it's bad if you do. For me, is this match and the quote work, the actions in the ring, is it capturing my attention enough to believe that there's a rivalry here? And as much as there was all this character stuff around Eddie and Perry with Terry and China on the outside and all this other stuff, I just felt like match-wise, it was still kind of just a match to me. And that's not a bad thing. Again, great work, sure. Did it look, everything snap and pop and look good? Absolutely. Of course it would. But without the use, I should say, of Terry and China and personality and stuff, I kind of felt like this would have been a match on Nitro. And the fact that, no offense, it was for the European Championship at the time, which was not exactly the most heralded title, I think that kind of stands by that, So, but again, I don't know. I think that going back to the original question, the style was definitely standout, but was it enough to capture your imagination? I don't know. You'd have to go back and watch.
Yeah, I still remember watching that episode of Raw when the camera just cut backstage and then you just saw the Radicals there for the first time on WWF television and thinking, whoa, because I was already a fan of Benoit and Eddie in WCW, and I just couldn't believe. I was like, whoa, what's it? It was almost me thinking back of when Hall and Nash went on Nitro, and I was thinking, hold on, what is going on here? Obviously, we didn't really have much use of the internet. It was still in its infancy. Oh, the youth of today will never understand the excitement of the element of surprise in professional wrestling. They just don't anymore. Do you think around about this time is where you could see a potential future world champion in Eddie Guerrero? Because I think when they paired him with China and broke him away from the Radicals thing, he really started to come into his own within the company.
No, I think Eddie Guerrero was a self-made man, and I'm going to draw a further lateral comparison to this, if we can, or parallel comparison to this. Take the Radicals coming to WWF at that time. Compare that to Bret Hart, Jim Neidhart, and Davey Boy Smith coming to WCW a few years prior when they did, okay? WWF did what WCW should have done, where you got three guys, and I mean, in Radical's case, it was four, but you got three guys who were white hot, coming off of a big angle, all these other things happening, and clearly the standout guy was immediately put into a world title picture, that being Benoit. Whereas Bret comes in as a special guest referee after cutting a promo, and to me was almost showing WCW, hey, this is what you could have done, but you didn't. And I thought that clearly Benoit was going to be the standout guy. And I feel that Eddie especially worked himself up to that world champion level. I think Benoit had the pass coming in because let's face it, he literally walked away as the world champion on the other side. So you've already got that steam behind him. Capitalize that, use it here. Eddie builds himself up. Malenko stays steady in the middle, and Perry, unfortunately, does kind of fall off in the end. But overall, I think that Eddie Guerrero did break through after this, which was sorely needed because he would have been floundering in there otherwise.
Yeah, it's interesting as well with Brett, the latest Chris Van Vliet interview, which is where he has Dan Soder and Will Sasso on, and they were basically doing impressions. Now, Will Sasso actually talks about the time he wrestles Bret Hart in WCW, and he said about what the whole experience was like, and he's saying, you know, he referred to himself as a big bag of flour, and he said, you know, Bret was just like, I'll do everything, just listen to me. Yep. And I walked out there just thinking, you know, Bret Hart can have a match with anybody and make them look at least half decent. And he said he wrestled an inexperienced big bag of flour that has no clue and got the job done. It makes me think, just why didn't it work for Bret in WWE? I mean, this would be a whole new conversation another time. But
bringing it back to what we were just talking about too, you could say the same about Benoit. You could say the same about Guerrero. You could say the same about Malenko and Saturn to a degree as well. But as far as star power goes, I think that's where Chris had the notoriety coming in. Eddie was building it, and that's where they found their success. So, you know, again, having people that can, going back to our original conversation here, work well is great. But you have to have that angle. And even as dumb as it was, the fact that we remember Will Sasso and Bret Hart wrestling, that tells you that it stuck in your head for some reason. So there you have it.
Yeah. Do you think, though, that the on-screen pairing, though, between Eddie and Chyna was perfect for what they both needed at that time?
I think, honestly, it benefited Eddie more than it benefited Chyna, which I think it was designed to do. Chyna was already kind of made. We saw that dynamic, but I still think that helped Eddie get over as a character, which is what he needed to do. Again, nobody could ever question Eddie Guerrero as far as being a good wrestler, but it was, could he be entertaining enough in a WWF setting to get a hold of you? And it proved that he could. Because let's face it, a lot of Eddie Guerrero we saw before that in WCW, he was either kind of a quiet cruiserweight guy or he was angry, and that was it.
Yeah, and honestly, that's the thing as well, that I think everyone fell in love with Eddie in the WWF was his personality, that when we finally got to see what he could do in terms of just his showing his personality, the ribbing people, the going, like, having fun. We're going to the Tag Team Championship match on the line, Edge and Christian defending against the APA. Now, this is this is the stuff I love. It all starts with a backstage segment. Mick Foley's talking to somebody, and then Edge approaches him, explains that Christian is what he believes has food poisoning. Mick doesn't believe him at first, thinks it's all a bit of a convenience, and then eventually we see after the medic guy actually says, I don't think Christian, I can clear him to compete. Foley's sort of like, I apologise, I didn't think you were being serious. And then we get the whole Christian tossing whatever horrible stuff that was into the toilet. I mean, it's still not a pretty sight to see, where he's just like, Mick, don't come in, I'm totally barfing in here. And then just seeing Mick just leaning over and be like, well, I would say that you guys are like totally so busted and that, and then saying, I think you guys are going to get your asses kicked against the Acolytes. There was a term that Mick always referred to, and I've been to a couple of Mick's live shows here when he's done them in London, and that nickname everyone had for him, which was Credully, Christian, Edge and Foley. Do you feel that Edge and Christian's charisma and comedy around this time was really needed? Because they had great on-screen chemistry with Foley for one, but apart from, we see these two guys, they're kind of, we see them do the stuff with Gangrel, with the Brood, but it's when they start getting into this picture amongst the tag teams, start doing the benefit for flash photography, all this sort of thing, we really start to see what these guys really do on a charisma basis, and they backed it up in the ring. Do you think they get the credit they're due as a tag team?
What I loved most about the interaction between Edge and Foley, backstage especially, was Edge's Canadian accent still predominantly riding through. Mick, you got to come see what's going on. Like, you really can't go. But in all seriousness, This was, I feel the comedy stuff always lended itself better to Christian than it did Edge. So I think they were probably discovering that too as they were going on with these two. But yeah, I think to quickly answer your point, yeah, there was obviously some development here. And I think that as we saw them grow and change, and even as we see them grow and change continually throughout the time we're producing this, it's different dynamics, it's different personalities. And like I said before, we're going to see people stumble and fall, and some things are going to work and some people aren't. In this case, I think, again, it was Edge and Christian elevating themselves to a point where they would eventually find themselves being much bigger stars.
Do you think that the 80s and early 90s aside, do you think that during this era was the best tag team division era?
I don't know. There were good tag teams. There were also not so good tag teams, but everybody could work. Everybody could wrestle. Everybody could perform. So that's where I'll leave it, because I think it's just... That's kind of a subjective question, right? Like, it's very hard for me to say any era was the best for anything, but I think they had probably a better focus on tag teams in general than they do recently.
Next up was the Intercontinental Championship being defended in a steel cage match between Val Venis, who was the champion, accompanied by Trish Stratus to the ring, and Rikishi. The stipulation was added. This is also during a time where Too Cool and Rikishi were extremely over with the crowd. During this match, Lita comes out for a bit of revenge, starts whipping Trish, a little bit of whipping revenge. As over as Rikishi was, Val Venis really, his popularity had died off at this point. You know, the haircut, the god-awful entrance music that they gave him.
I forgot this entrance music ever happened for him. The techno remix of his "Hello, Ladies."
Yeah, no disrespect to Rikishi, as I said, he was extremely over, but the crowd seemed louder and more into this once Lita ran to the ring and started attacking Trish, and the two of them were brawling at ringside.
I'm not gonna lie, I didn't do a lot of back history into this, and I know they had a bit of a video thing or something explaining it, but to me, why was this match in a steel cage? I didn't understand that, other than to have Rikishi flop off the top of it and do his... this is the era of Rikishi falling off things, too. It didn't happen a lot, but when it did, it was usually something big, and they tried to make it something bigger. And I don't know if that was his idea or their idea or both, but if this was the time where it was just throw anything together and hope that it sticks, this to me was more of a filler match, honestly, than the other one was, than the Al Snow and Taz one was, because at least the Al Snow and Taz one didn't take too long and didn't have a crazy stipulation on it. I couldn't for the life of me figure out why these guys were in such an intense rivalry. The only way to settle it would be in a steel cage. So I don't know. I genuinely lost a lot of interest in this, and you can say Rikishi was over. I don't know if Rikishi was over as much as his tights were. And I don't, and that's no disrespect. I mean, the guy did things, don't get me wrong. One of the longest running careers between all the gimmicks he had and all the different faces of Rikishi or Fatu that you want to say, and great contributor. But I think that character was more over because of the stink face and the grossness than it was anything else. That's personal opinion.
I can't help but always think, and I've always thought this about how this match really came about. I think it almost feels like they just got called into a room with Vince, and he went, right, what am I going to do with the two of you? Okay, so Intercontinental Championship match, that's fine. Well, we're going to send the girls out to go and brawl, and everyone's going to be focused on them, so we're going to need to give you a little something. I'll tell you what, Rikishi, you're a big man. Let's do something stupid with you. I'll tell you what, let's put it in a steel cage match. Why? Because I'm Vince McMahon, damn it. And we're going to put it in a steel cage match, and you're going to go and do a splash off the top of the cage, but you're not going to win the title anyway, and then people will forget about this match tomorrow.
You've had enough use of your knees, right? You're done with walking regularly as a human, right?
Yeah, Val Venis, don't worry if you absolutely destroy him when you land on him. I mean, he served his purpose in the company anyway. That's kind of, we'll bring out until the right to censor come along anyway.
Yeah, that could be argued a whole different show, but anyway.
That could be. But yeah, so Rikishi could have climbed out the cage, decided to go for this splash, or Vince probably told him that's how it was going to go. And he goes to climb out the exit outside the cage door, and then Taz appears and hits Rikishi over the head with a TV camera, and Val Venis gets the pinfall. Again, absolutely bizarre. But Rikishi did really have a huge rise, and he was still so over until the whole "I did it for The Rock" running over Austin thing. It worked.
It worked. I won't deny that, but I still just sticking to the show. I can't get over the fact that this was all in a steel cage. And again, to go back to even just the last episode you and I did, stupid babyface could have got out of the cage and won. Nah, I'm going to jump off and hurt myself instead.
Exactly. The Intercontinental Championship on the line. This match, we talked about the European Championship earlier. How did you feel the mid-card titles in the World Wrestling Federation at the time were? With the Intercontinental Championship especially, it was so prestigious, and then it kind of just become almost a second, an afterthought. With it being on Val Venis, it was at that time, it was the last person it was on where it was on somebody who's coming sort of towards the end of his time in the company, really, wasn't it? Because then it would go on to the likes of Jericho and Regal and Benoit and so on, and Eddie himself. It would kind of go against, again, legit workers that were guys that were teetering on the edge of almost main eventing. Sure. And it became a huge deal again. And then after all that, it just then phased out again.
Well, I mean, the Intercontinental was always the guy makes the belt or the belt makes the guy. I felt that was even more than the world title half the time, because the world title scene for the longest time in WWF was always around people that were in the main event, like we're in that scene already. I think that the IC did go through some rehab after this, and it was good for it because, again, it made it a viable title. But I think overall that this was a throwaway match and a throwaway feud for me that I don't remember, and the steel cage didn't help.
I know you've given your thoughts on Rikishi, but do you think once Rikishi got to that main event picture, do you think the company dropped the ball with him, or do you just think he's just kind of served his purpose and that's it, basically?
I don't know if he ever really did make it to the main event scene as much as he was placed in it, and multi-man and all this other stuff. Like, forgive me if I don't remember, did he ever have a one-on-one world title match ever? I would have to look. I don't think so.
I'm not sure. He might have done on a Raw or a SmackDown.
Maybe, but if he did, it was definitely forgettable. So that's kind of my point. So I don't know if he ever made it to that scene so much as he was placed there for the pop and for the reasons. So, but that's subjective. So,
because you get towards like the end of the year and you look at, we talk about a lot of the main eventers now, it's always the same faces, always Roman Reigns and CM Punk and Seth Rollins and Cody Rhodes and that. But if you the main event scene was stacked. You had Austin come back by the end of that year. You had The Rock, you had Triple H, you had Kurt Angle, you had The Undertaker, you had Kane, you had well, I guess you throw Rikishi in there. You had Jericho, you had Benoit, you had Big Show. That's like 10 main eventers. What I loved about this sort of period of time was how they would sort of switch them out, and if they weren't in the main event for the title, it was they were in the number one contenders match, or they were settling their own personal beef that they had going on in their own storylines, which was kind of what was going on in this show, especially leading up to the first of our triple main event matches. If you think about the Undertaker versus Kurt Angle, this was a rivalry that had been building. Kurt Angle at the time wasn't the Kurt Angle that we would then go on to see. That was the very aggressive wrestling machine gimmick. This was Kurt Angle still in his infancy, who couldn't help but antagonise the Undertaker, but looked scared to death any time that he saw Taker coming for him. Now, this is one of the things I loved about this show when I was talking about backstage segments. The Tom and Jerry dynamic between Taker and Kurt Angle at this pay-per-view was brilliant. The fact that you see Undertaker on his bike looking for Kurt Angle, as soon as Kurt Angle spots him, he just literally stands frozen in fear, runs off, Taker goes chasing after him. But what I love is when he at first sees Kurt Angle messing around with his motorbike when he's trying to be interviewed by Michael Cole. And when he goes up to him, and it's the first time I've ever seen the Undertaker really talk like this, and he turns around and he says to him, "Oh, you want to play, boy? Oh, we're going to play now. Hey, come here, you little bitch." like that. I never thought The Undertaker would ever come out with something like that. But even then, when you've got Kurt Angle just running away from him, just going to him, I'm sorry, I didn't mean anything, but I swear. And the Undertaker casually just walking towards him past the camera going, oh, you're going to be sorry. You're going to be real sorry when I catch you, little ass. It was so fun between the two of them. And their match was really enjoyable because you had Kurt Angle, instead of being all technical and be the best wrestler that Angle that we knew and loved could be, he actually used the cowardice approach. He would take the cheap shots at The Undertaker. He would work on that damaged knee. But what I loved as well was there's this moment where The Undertaker's pinning Kurt Angle, and as the referee goes to put the count to 3, Undertaker sort of lifts Angle's arm and head up like that and just looks at the referee and shakes his head as if to say, no, I'm not done. And there was just this moment now where the referee's having a go at The Undertaker, and The Undertaker gives him a expletive word, tells him to F you, so to speak. And I love that whole kind of, oh, well, you're in trouble now because... And at that moment, I actually thought The Undertaker had missed his opportunity. I actually thought, oh, Angle's going to find a way to cheat to win this match. He didn't, obviously, and he gets the last round powerbomb and loses. Now, this is at a time which really highlights Kurt Angle's rookie year in the company. Undertaker was still new in the American Badass gimmick, which was very divisive amongst some of the fan base. I thought it freshened everything up, and I think that's one of the reasons why Taker worked for so long. But what do you think it was about Kurt Angle at this time, though, which just gave him this incredible fast development in terms of settling within the company in this new surrounding, but also put him on this huge trajectory? Because at No Mercy that year, just a few months later, he's world champion.
Well, I'm going to use a word that I'm going to have to beat myself on here, but what worked for Kurt Angle then was one of the basic principles of pro wrestling. Kurt Angle, despite wanting to succeed, despite wanting all the glory and the championships and everything else you can put along with that, played the perfect chicken shit heel. He was antagonistic, but at the same time, once you called him on it, he knew he was in trouble. You talk about the whole Tom and Jerry thing of this thing. I would say that probably the most interesting part of this to me was Kurt Angle's doing his entrance and Undertaker doesn't even wait. Rides his motorcycle out, which just logistically speaking, I'm saying to myself, wouldn't it have been faster to just walk? I mean, you got to get on the bike, you got to start it, you got to get it around the corner. But again, that's overthinking the plot here. Comes out, has to get off the bike, starts attacking Angle. They fight through the crowd, and the match is what it is. But, you know, this was establishing Kurt Angle as a weenie, as a guy that needed to be beaten up in the logic of WWE. Nowadays, we deal with people that are weenies, and we just have to put up with them. But realistically, in the world of wrestling, that's what Kurt Angle was then, and he portrayed it perfectly to a guy that had just had enough of his crap in The Undertaker.
I love the way you called out the inconvenience of moments in matches and that. And I mean, you're absolutely right, because you don't think of these things sometimes, and you think, actually, yeah, no, it would have been quicker if...
Have you ever rode a motorcycle?
No.
It's a process. It's not a big process, but it's not like what we see in the movies where you just, hop on your horse and yeehaw, you got to get on, you got to get your clutch going, you got to, there's a ton of stuff going on here. Like, anyway.
Brilliant. Do you think, because this is another thing as well, this is at a time where the company is really almost borderline successfully creating fresh stars. We already talked about Benoit and Guerrero, Jericho. They obviously were already known, but it was the push they kind of received over time, and then you've got Kurt Angle that comes in. This is a time where there was more success in making these main eventers, this next crop of main eventers, than what you see now, because now we see the company now kind of, they tend to fail a lot with that. Now, the argument could always be, is it partly down to the talent because they've not shown enough to the company that they are ready, or that they're ever going to make that spot their own? Or is it a case of the company still, to an extent, just can't separate themselves away from the already main star, so we need to keep booking Roman Reigns in main events at WrestleMania. We need to keep having Seth Rollins coming into the main event. Why, Brock Lesnar's retired. Oh, Brock Lesnar's back, like, a couple of weeks later.
Where do we put the onus on the fan? Where do we put the onus? Everybody likes to blame creative and blame the wrestlers and everything else. Where do we put the onus on the fan to say, why can't we just enjoy this? Why can't we get behind somebody? And I'm going to flip this on you and say, how many times have you heard a relatively new star come up and they get a title shot and they lose? And all of a sudden, the fans are like, oh, I can't believe they didn't put the world title on so-and-so. This would have been the perfect time. Would it really have been the perfect time? Or would it really be what you wanted to have in the moment so you could have that pop and that big title change in that moment? Because we've seen people get the title and do nothing with it. It's one of those cases where we always want to blame everybody else, but we also have to ask ourselves, well, what are we willing to accept? What do we like? I'm sorry. I'm going to go ahead and say it. The amount of attention that these so-called overstaying main eventers get, the amount of merchandise they still sell, and the amount of interest they still garner far outweighs anything anybody new is doing, with the exception rarely of one or two. We always, as wrestling fans, want everything now because we want to say we were there when this happened. But this thing never ends. So to complain about a never-ending story not having an ending, that's on us, Yeah.
I guess, but you and I, we're in that crop now where we've been fans for so many years and we've seen so many different transitions within wrestling companies and the whole landscape of professional wrestling, where we're kind of like, we don't go and start always hating online behind keyboards like some fans do, because we're like, we get this. This isn't the first time this happens. It's not going to be the last time this ever happens. We just learn as fans just to be content and think, we're not enjoying this, but it will pass. It will pass. It's not forever. And then we just look forward to whatever comes next and hope that we enjoy that a little bit more.
Boy, if there's ever a name for a wrestling podcast, this too shall pass.
Right. We're going to trademark that one. Thank you.
All right. So are we done with Taker and Angle here?
Oh, we are done with Taker and Angle as we move into Triple H and Chris Jericho in a last man standing match. Now, this was a rivalry that was really heating up, and it was only earlier on Raw where Chris Jericho, we all believed, had won the title from Triple H. It was the subject of an El Hebner fast count, and we had this whole scenario of El Hebner being called out by the McMahon-Helmsley regime. He forced El Hebner to reverse the decision, which he agreed to on the basis that as long as he's a WWE official, that no one puts their hands on him ever again. Triple H says, yeah, that's fine. Decision's reversed. Then he says, right, you're fired, and then they beat him down. So leading up to this, obviously, Chris Jericho is disgruntled. Now, I loved a lot of the dynamics of this because you've got Triple H and Stephanie chilling out on the sofa backstage, watching what's happening on the screen, and then there's a delivery of more flowers. The card makes it out like it's come from Kurt Angle. We then find out that when Triple H goes to find Kurt Angle, it was actually Chris Jericho luring him into a beatdown backstage. So we've still got this whole, while Angle's dealing with Undertaker issues, we've got this burning rivalry in the background between Triple H and Angle as kind of like the third rivalry that's going on in the background while he's doing this thing with Jericho. This match, for me, was match of the night. It was brutal. This is back when chair headshots were still a thing in the WWE. Triple H would do what I call flare level bleeding, because Triple H during that time would do a lot of flare bleeding. It would be a lot of blood. The brawling that they did was pretty much throughout the entire arena. You got Stephanie's involvement. Now, Stephanie really was coming to her own as that character from the quiet Stephanie McMahon that we saw till she switched to Armageddon, really becoming a huge player in the company at the time.
She was the women's champion.
Triple H barely got the win. It was a Rocky Apollo Creed ending, almost, but Triple H just getting up at the very, very last second. Do you think that this sort of match really helped elevate Chris Jericho into that main event picture? Because it proved he could do it.
Well, this goes back to what I said earlier about wrestling bigger than he was. And Jericho did a great job of that in this match. We watch these matches nowadays, and watching on a device or watching on a computer, or like I'm here at my studio setup, so I've got like the big speakers around, and I'm hearing things I never heard watching as a kid, right? And there's one point where Mike Chioda gives a very audible 6 minutes time cue while he's yelling at Triple H. And that was when I discovered that this match would go over time, because they went a lot longer than 6 minutes after this. Nevertheless, Jericho's elevation in the main event scene, I think it already happened with him, quote unquote, winning the title. I think that Jericho, again, had figured out the system and was well on his way. Even though Triple H has a few inches on him and obviously has a much bigger build than him, Jericho didn't look small in this match, and I think that was very important because he needed to hang, and he did. And we would see this materialize in different forms throughout their careers, too. So just a couple of years after this, that it would be Mania X8, right? And I was there for that match. There were people that obviously could see the big difference then between Triple H and Jericho. But H also had all the time to rehab and get bigger and, you know, get all cut up and everything. But I think at the time, Jericho was punching within his weight class, figuratively, if not literally. So, yeah, I think he did a good job in here.
Do you think maybe Jericho should have gone over in that match?
No.
No?
No. Like I said, as a fan, would I have wanted to see it happen? Of course. But still plenty of time. Plenty of time for him. And we would see that happen later on. A couple years later, you know, becomes the, quote, undisputed champion. And I think it solidified him as somebody that could take that role a couple of years later. But it was so top heavy with talent and stars they were building. Remember, these guys weren't as big as stars then as what we perceive them to be now either. So there's that factor as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And then we head into the main event, the WWF Championship on the line. Stipulation is if The Rock gets disqualified, he would lose the title, and he was defending the title against Chris Benoit, who had Shane McMahon in his corner. Now, a little bit earlier in the night, we had a moment where Shane came out, looked like he was ready for a match. He called out The Rock. This was just obviously a distraction so Chris Benoit could go to The Rock's locker room and destroy his belongings and
his GQ wardrobe king.
Yes, ripping his $500 shirts and
another $5,000 shirt. Who cares? Whatever.
Okay, it was probably they were probably about $20 shirts really, but who knows?
Oh no, I'm sure he was spending money. They didn't have Temu back then, man, so I'm sure he was getting some good threads.
If anyone knows what the year 2000 equivalent of Temu was,
in Canada, it was International Clothiers, and I know that because that's where I bought my dress clothes.
Oh, there we go. We got that one. The ending was a massive shock. I didn't see the ending quite as it appeared. There was a moment between Shane and The Rock where there was a steel chair. The Rock didn't use it, but he then locked Benoit in the crippler crossface poorly, I may say, because Dwayne, we know, has a thing about not putting on holds correctly, the sharpshooter, and he thinks he wins the match, but Earl Hebner disqualifies him because he saw The Rock holding the chair. He didn't see him use it, which I think, goes against it anyway, but new champion. Until Foley comes out and says, well, I didn't see a disqualification, the match will restart, and then we get a rock bottom and The Rock wins. Now, The Rock's popularity at this point, it increased even more so with Austin's absence. Do you think this was the pinnacle of The Rock's popularity? Because even after this, I don't remember The Rock ever, especially after WrestleMania 18 with Hogan, I don't recall The Rock's popularity ever being at anywhere near those heights ever again.
I mean, of all time, I would say no. Rock can show up tomorrow and people are going to lose their mind. As far as within the WWE sphere,
yeah,
maybe. I don't know, because Rock's momentum kept going, and then, like you said, X8 happens, and he was the hot guy until Mania happened. until Mania happened, and then the flip happens, the nostalgia pop for Hogan comes, and dude, I was there. So I can tell you flat out, there wasn't a single person that cared if Rock won that match or lost, so we just wanted to see Hogan be there, you know what I mean? But Rock was the guy. Rock was the guy, hands down. I think maybe in the wrestling bubble, that was probably his peak popularity, but I don't know, man. I just watched people doing a comedy roast on Kevin Hart's special, and it wasn't even the roast of Kevin Hart. It was this other series he's doing on Netflix, looking for a new comedian, and people are still doing the eyebrow. You know, people are still throwing, like, Rock is so popular now just as a cultural meme than he ever was back in the 90s, early 2000s. But for the time, sure, I could say that was probably the hottest he was in the WWE bubble.
What do you think about Benoit's rapid rise after leaving WCW? Because I know we already mentioned it earlier, but this was, I think, his first shot at the title.
Yeah, I don't know for sure, but yeah, I think that Benoit was where he's supposed to be. Like we said earlier, I think Benoit was where he was supposed to be compared to what they floundered with Brett on the other side.
This is where I feel, especially this era, I felt was where the balance within the company was almost perfect between sports entertainment and the quality of wrestling. I felt it was the right mixture, the right balance. Do you agree? Or do you?
I think so. I think, there's 8 matches on this thing. So realistically, you would never get 8 matches in 2.5, 3 hours today from WWE. So I think you're right. But we also didn't have commercial breaks. We also didn't have streaming. And so there's 100 reasons why this was the way it was. But I think overall, timing-wise, the show went well. Pace-wise, the show went well for the most part. I did feel a couple matches went too long, including the Triple H Jericho match, not just because I heard the time cue, but I felt it, while it was good, it just took too long to get there. The only objections I have on this overall thing is really Venus and Rikishi in a cage. That was really my kind of question mark on this whole thing.
Yeah, no, I agree with you on that one, absolutely. Do you feel? Where do you feel on these false finishes? The whole the result's gone one way, but then actually there's a segue. For example, here Foley didn't see the disqualification, so it restarts. How do you feel? Do you think they're okay if they're used sporadically and within the right context, or do you think it shouldn't happen?
Well, I think it gives the commissioner or general manager role or whatever, it gives it the clout it actually needs. At the same time, it also neuters a referee. So I'm always 50-50 on these things. But overall, if you need to get a good guy over as a good guy and thwart the bad guy, it's a pretty awesome way to do it as long as it's not done every show. Yeah.
Do you feel that this is where the WWF crowds peaked?
In what sense?
In terms of, we look at crowds now, you can watch an event at home or sometimes go to an event. Even at WrestleMania, we've heard like the crowds are, they're still into it, but they don't seem as loud and as into it as they used to be. We used to go and used to see, almost every other person would have a sign up throughout the whole show and things like that, and everyone was loud. And now it seems the energy's there, but it doesn't seem to be at the levels that they used to be.
No, because everybody's staring at their phones, man. Cell phones weren't as prominent then as they are now, and I think that's a big part of it. And everybody's looking to get themselves over in the crowd these days rather than pay attention to what they're paying money to go see. So that's the easy answer to that one, is that, do I think the crowds were as engaged now as they were then? No, but no crowd is anymore. That's just the way it is.
Yeah, I do. Like when I've been to both the WrestleManias I've been to, I only video the entrances because I think sometimes they're cool to look back on my perspective. I never film any of the matches because I want to live in those moments. I want to enjoy that. I always say it's always weird being at WrestleMania when there's no commentary. It always feels really surreal whenever that happens. Which match do you feel has aged the best when you go back and look at it? Okay, which match, if you had to pick one? Obviously not Val Venis versus Rikishi.
Well, again, that was the thing with this too. If I'm going to go through this entire card and pick one that I would want to watch again, I don't know. to be honest with you. To me, I think you and I have different perspectives on this show. I thought this was a good show, and I know that other websites and other people have said, oh, it's the best one of the year, and it stood out this way or whatever, and I'm not there. So I don't know. If I had to watch any of these again, I'd honestly say Al Snow and Taz, because it was quick.
Which wrestler do you think probably gained the most from the event?
Oof.
I think you go between the likes of, in my opinion, you look at Eddie, Jericho, and Benoit, 3 WCW guys.
Oh, yeah, I'll go with that. Yeah.
Okay.
I concur.
Okay. Well, Fully Loaded 2000 perfectly captures what made the Attitude Era so special. The Rock was becoming a global icon, Triple H had cemented himself as the company's top heel, and newer stars like Kurt Angle, Chris Jericho and Chris Benoit were beginning to shape the next generation of WWF main events. Fully Loaded balances chaos with genuinely strong wrestling and remains one of the best examples of the WWF's incredible depth during arguably its hottest creative year ever. Remember, everyone, you can get involved with Celebrate Wrestling by heading over to Facebook and searching for Celebrate Wrestling. And also, don't forget, you can join Mitch and Dimitri with the alternate commentary table every Saturday. And, of course, on Sundays, it is Maguire on Wrestling with Mike here, who is occasionally joined by the likes of Dave Meltzer and Joe Aguinaldo. Mike, it's been a pleasure again. Thank you so much for your time and discussing all this with me and giving me your thoughts. I'm sure Rikishi won't thank you, but...
I did it for Legends and Champions.
Shut your mouth, you thong wearing fatty.
Oh, boy. How'd you know? Anyway.
Yeah, coming up next on Legends and Champions, Mike's attire. Not. Brilliant. We will be back.
Did you drop a not joke?
Not.
Party on, Wayne.
Party on, Garth. Excellent.
All right.
Yes, we will be back. We're coming up next. We will be talking the loose cannon Brian Pillman, or as Andy likes to say, Flying Brian. I can't do it as good as him, but there we go. Andy's not here, unfortunately. And then we will be going into the Hart family. We'll be discussing the Hart Foundation, the tag team, the stable, and we'll be talking Owen, and of course, the excellence of execution, Bret the Hitman Hart. Mike, thanks again, and we will see you next time. So until then, so long.